lesson this morning comes from Luke 2, verses 41 through 52. And if you would like to follow along in your pew Bibles, it's on page 59. Now every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was with the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and in human favor. Thanks be to God.
So I want to begin this morning a little bit differently. I want to begin with a demonstration. This is a game that I find myself playing nearly every day of my life, multiple times a day, actually. I find myself playing this game every time I exit a room, every time I'm about to close my car door. Now, there's nothing particularly religious about it, yet I still find myself playing it with an obsessively sacred level of commitment. So I could describe it to you, but I'm just going to show you. Prepare yourself. I'll turn so the choir can see too. All ready? Here we go. Do you see it? I'll just show you one more time. Ready? This is a little game I like to call Phone Keys Wallet. I play this game a lot. It's where I try to make sure that my phone, my keys, and my wallet are on my person, the not-so-holy trinity of my life. Now, I win this game a lot. But sometimes it doesn't go quite as planned, like last Thursday night, when it goes like this. In that moment where one of the three sacred objects is missing, everything shuts down. It is as if the universe has put a big old mute button on the world. Any conversation I might have been having with you is over in that moment. Because my brain can only focus on one thing, and that is the quest. Where I search for what I have lost. My mind starts to race as if I'm sitting in a time machine looking real fast out the window at every place that I have been that day. And if it is my telephone that I have lost, the moment that I have somebody call it so I can listen for that ring, I listen to it with this intensity that can only be rivaled by this primal urge where a caveman is listening for a woolly mammoth distantly for his breakfast. That is how hardcore I get when searching for one of my missing items. It is as if the entire universe hangs on me finding what I lost. And it leads me to ask a very important question. What if it did? What if it did? What if the nature of the cosmos was utterly and completely dependent on me locating what was missing? It's a kind of crazy question to ask. But that's exactly what Mary and Joseph are facing in that moment after walking a day's journey away from Jerusalem and realizing that Jesus is missing. Now, Mary and Joseph are devout Jews. Every single year they travel from their home in Nazareth to the city of Jerusalem to participate in the feast, in the festival of Passover. Passover is a big deal. It is one of the most important religious festivals. It is a time of eating and a time of ritual sacrifice. It is a time where they remember the Passover story. They remember the plagues in Egypt and the very last one that freed them from slavery, the death of the firstborn. When the angel of death was to pass over the land of Egypt and take the firstborn sons of all the people and all the animals, but it spares the firstborn of the Hebrew people. It literally passes over them because they marked their doors out of faith. This is a day worth celebrating. And so Jerusalem is going to be filled with people, filled to bursting with travelers. If you lived within 20 miles of Jerusalem, you were required to get up and go all the way to that festival. And that festival lasts 7 or 8 days, depending on your level of religious practice and which time period this is occurring in. Now we know that Mary and Joseph are devout because they don't live 20 miles from Jerusalem. They live 80 miles from Jerusalem in Nazareth. They are not required to be there. And not only do they go, but they go every year. Now this requirement was only for men that lived within the 20-mile radius of the city. So Mary doesn't have to go anyway. But she still goes. And we see Jesus' age here. We see that he's 12 years old. This is incredibly significant because you're not considered an adult until you're 13. As a child, you don't have to make that trip either. But still, every single year, like clockwork, it is a family tradition in this family to travel the 80 miles. To walk 15 miles a day on average through the sea of pilgrims to participate in the Passover festival. This is just something that they do. It is a normal part of their life together, which is why it's so shocking for Jesus' family when he goes missing. This isn't the first time they've made this trip. He has been where he's supposed to be every other time. What is different now? So they search with their family. They search with their other relatives, the people from Nazareth that they travel with. And it's important to travel in groups from your hometown to Jerusalem. The road to Jerusalem was not a safe place on a normal day, much less during the busiest travel day of the year, coming to and from the Passover festival. The road to Jerusalem was filled with wild animals, with bandits. And so they search among their family for Jesus, only to come up empty and to realize all at once that he is at least a day's journey behind them or 15 miles behind them. We can imagine what they were feeling at this moment as they were running, as the flow of pilgrims is leaving Jerusalem. They're going against that flow of people, asking everyone, describing what Jesus looked like, calling out a name taught to them by angels until they start to grow hoarse. They're also feeling tremendous guilt. They have to be. Because think about who this child is. It's not like when we lose something. The entire fate of the universe does indeed rest on this child's shoulders. This was the child that the prophet Isaiah prophesied about 800 years before. This is a child whose birth was heralded by God's army of singing angels to bewildered shepherds in a field. This is a child that when he's 8 days old, they bring him to the temple only to have him whisked up by Simeon and Anna so they can proclaim to anybody that will hear it that this child is God's Messiah, God's light to the world, and God's revelation to all people. This is a child that when he's born, so too is a new star in the sky that leads a group of wise men miles and miles across the earth just so that they can give him presents and worship him. This boy is God's greatest gift to mankind, and God has entrusted him to these two people and to them alone. And now they've lost him. There's no way that they don't feel guilty in their adrenaline-fueled search. Now, when they arrive in Jerusalem, it'll still be days where they are searching the overwhelmingly crowded city. Now, were this to happen now, they could just go to the Lost Child building, to the Lost and Found. I did some research at Disneyland every day, today too, every day. 30 children are returned to their families at these lost and found places. Every day. During the pilgrimage to Mecca, where a million Muslims go every year, maybe it's a little less, but they lose lots and lots of people, and different mosques have set up Find Your Child stations just for this reason. That didn't exist. Did not exist in first century Palestine. So Mary and Joseph are forced to just retrace their steps, to search the Temple Mount, which is an area the size of about 6 football fields that are crowded to bursting with people and pilgrims, hunting desperately for Jesus. Now, depending on how you read this scripture, on the counting that you've done in your head, it is somewhere between 3 or 5 days that they go without their son, where they wonder if he is alive or dead. And when they do finally see him, they are shocked and they are astonished at what they see. Here's their boy sitting in the courtyard of the temple, talking to the teachers, to the religious scholars, to the most respected and learned individuals, people who know about God's law and know about God. And Jesus is sitting there listening to them, asking them questions, and answering the questions that they asked of him. The Bible tells us that everybody that heard him was amazed by what he understood and by what he said. It's in this moment, in a flood of emotions, everything from amazement to anger to grief to sorrow to anxiety, that Mary calls out to her boy, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." Mary does what we all do when we get so focused on our own pain, on our own search, on our own quest that we can't see anything else. And she makes it all about her and how she feels. Now, she's focused for a good reason. And the emotional toll that this has taken on her is weighing her down to a point that's hard to comprehend. And when she makes it all about her, when she asks Jesus, why did you do this to us? You know that it doesn't matter what he says, what his reason is. The outcome is still the same. She is still hurting. She is still in trauma and in shock and in grief. She looks at her son and she says, "Look, child, look at me." She even ropes Joseph into this. She goes, "Look at your dad. Look at how anxious we are. Look at your father." And it's those words, "your father," that key in to this 12-year-old boy. As we hear his voice for the first time in his life. And he says, "Why are you searching for me?" Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? What this young man is saying to his emotionally and physically drained mother is, you should have known where I would be, where I would have to be. You're asking me to look at my Father? Mom, that's why I'm here. That's what I am doing. Don't you know who my Father is? I have to be in His house. I have to be about His business. This is the only phrase that we hear Jesus utter before He begins His ministry as an adult. It's the only story we have of Him where He's not a little baby or a full-grown man. And when we look at the words, really look at the words that Jesus says at 12 years old, to look at what those words are saying, we soon realize that Jesus really doesn't have to say anything else from that point on. That as a 12-year-old, He has outlined everything that He will be about. Every single miracle, every healing, every sermon, His own death, His own resurrection, all of it points back to the realization that He had as a 12-year-old looking at His mom, that He was God's Son, and that He must be about His Father's business. When we think about it, this story from the beginning of Jesus' life foreshadows what will happen at the end of it. Jesus will be back to Jerusalem again. It will be Passover again. Again, Jesus will stand in the temple and talk to the teachers. Again, they will be bewildered and amazed. And again, they won't understand. Here it just says they don't understand, and He goes home. There they won't understand, and they will kill Him for it. When He goes to the temple, then He's about His Father's business. When He goes to the temple later, He is so about His Father's business that He's turning over tables because He doesn't like the business that's happening there. That's not His dad's business. When Jesus comes back to the temple, He will participate in the Passover feast again with His family. In the story of Jesus at 12, Mary and Joseph spend 3 days in Jerusalem looking for their son, not sure if he's alive or dead. The next time He comes back, it'll be 3 days where He will be in a tomb where people know that He's dead. And in both cases, He will emerge with more wisdom and more power and more authority than He had the last time that they saw Him. Our story this morning ends the same way it started, with travel. When Mary and Joseph find Jesus, they leave. They go back home to Nazareth. It says that they don't understand. That they don't understand what Jesus was saying. But Mary doesn't forget. She treasures all of this in her heart. And from that point on, Jesus doesn't cause them any more trouble. He honors His father and mother just like the commandment says to do. And He grows in wisdom and in stature and in favor with people and with God. I love the Cotton Patch translation of this. It says that God liked him. I like that. So where is grace in this story? Throughout the season of Lent, we have held up the stories where people are struggling. Powerful stories where people are in extreme experiences of anxiety and fear and concern. And we've searched out where God's grace stood in these moments, hoping that doing so will help us to be able to see God's grace when we are struggling, when we are weak, when we find ourselves anxious, when we make it all about us and when the quest is all that matters. In the story where grace is found is obvious. It's obvious. The Bible tells us outright where grace is in the verse that comes directly before what we read this morning. If you look at Luke chapter 2, verse 40, it states, "The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him." Now, I recognize the translation in your pew Bibles will say, the favor of God was upon him. But I checked 28 translations in preparation for this sermon this morning, and 20 out of 28 felt the need to just call that favor what it was: grace. God's grace is with Jesus, with that 12-year-old, sitting and learning while his parents frantically search him out. Whether they know it or not, what Mary and Joseph are really searching for as they comb the city for their son is grace itself. The same thing that we search for when we find ourselves looking for Christ in the midst of our own struggles and trials. Because a search for Christ is always a search for grace. And what this story shows us is that Jesus and the grace that fills him completely is not hiding, and he's not hard to find. He calls to us in the midst of our own frantic search for him, in the same way that he does his mother. Why do you look for me? Didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? And many of us know exactly what it's like to search for grace and to search for Christ. To feel like we used to know where Jesus was. To feel like we used to know what it felt like to be close to him. So we retrace our steps to find him. We think that maybe Jesus has gotten lost while we were distracted. Maybe he's hiding from us. Maybe it's our fault that he's gone. And so we search and we ask as many people as we can if they've seen him. We describe what he looks like and what our experience with him was like, hoping that they can point us in the right direction. For many, it's been so long since they felt the presence of Christ again that they wonder if they've even seen him in the first place. And many people, after lots of searching, just give up searching altogether out of fear that if they do find him, it might require something of them. Many tell themselves that if they ever do encounter Jesus again, that they're going to make sure to ask him why he treated them this way. It's in these moments that it's easy to read the words of Jesus to his exasperated mother and see them as defiant or even cruel. But that's not what they are. There's profound grace in his words. When he says, why do you search for me? Shouldn't you know that I would be in my Father's house? Jesus is not just telling her where he is, but telling all of us where he will always be. That when we find ourselves frantic, searching wildly for grace, like we lost our car keys, we need to realize that grace exists where Christ is, because Christ is full of grace. The statement of Jesus, when he says that he must be in his Father's house, it's him pointing a GPS at his eternal presence. He's saying that where God's business, where God's affairs are happening, is God's house. And God's house is where he has to be. He isn't hiding. And his presence there is not about hurting our feelings or making us feel anguish when we search for him and for grace in the wrong places. It's about pointing us to the right ones. If we want to find Christ, find grace, we need only look where God's business is happening, where God's mercy is being offered, where God's hope is being held on to, where God's love and reconciliation are the defining aspects of the relationships formed there, where humility and the recognition of God's will is celebrated, where God's peace is waged. These are the foundations of Christ's Father's house. They are the pillars that hold the ceiling to the sky. And they are where he will dwell. The statement of Christ at 12 years old is something that we should hear as an invitation. A profound invitation. But it's also something that we need to look at and look at honestly. That we need to look at as Christians. We need to look at as followers of Christ. We need to look at as a church. Because it's saying something to us. That if we want to be the kind of place where people can come and find Christ, then we better be about God's business. That if we want to be the kind of Christians where our search for Christ can end in our own hearts, then we need to be about God's business. Otherwise, we spend our time searching for grace, searching high and low, asking everyone where it will be. It's an invitation to be God's house. And so it's my hope for us as a church, it's my hope for each of you as a person of faith, that we can be about God's business in this world in such a way that when people look to Christ, it will be so obvious where He is, because He cries out from our own hearts saying, you should know where I am. I am in my Father's house, and my Father's house is right here. Amen. When Jesus shares these words, people are excited. They're excited. They recognize that what He is saying is powerful, that He's filled with wisdom, that what He says matters. But they leave not understanding what He meant. My hope for us today, over 2,000 years since Jesus sat at 12 years old teaching the people, is that we understand. That we recognize that where God's business is happening, where God's house is, Christ is also. And that we seek to be that home for God in our lives, in our workplace, in our family, in our church, and in all of the things that we do. That we make sure that our actions are about God's business. And that when we do so, it will be impossible to separate the grace of God from the Christ that dwells within us. Amen.